We had the COP17 conference in Durban, I think it was, in December 2011, and we got a lot of exposure to the discussion, and I think a lot of people who wouldn't normally be interested because it was in South Africa got that exposure. Did it do good, and has there been follow-up?
It really did well, and I think the people of South Africa has been really drawn into the climate change debate and the complexities around it. Before that, it was not an issue. It was more government to government, business to business, and a business to government issue. And now after COP, it's very much back into that space, except that there is a COP every year. So this year we will see, okay, what happened on the follow-up from the Durban platform.
Well, to the layman, there are all these people producing carbon, and then you can do exchanges, and then you get credit for it. How does it work?
That's exactly the basis to it. Carbon credits is actually a mechanism to price fossil fuel out of the market and to price carbon into the market. And so as a real market, the prices will go up and down. It's a commodity, it's being very well traded. It's very politically sensitive, especially with the economic downturn of can you afford to do something, but can you afford not to do something? Well,
the classic case that's raised is Eskom. You could say, yes, it's not good to put all those coal fumes into the atmosphere, but we have to. It's the only way we've got for the next 25, 30 years.
Yeah, and that's why decisions taken now is actually so important, because decisions taken now will actually resonate for years later in terms of the carbon intensity of our grid and everything that we produce and export in terms of comparing to alternatives that might be produced with a lighter carbon footprint.
Now, you say you've got a project to eliminate the need to have lots of separate projects. You're looking at what sounds like streamlining the projects related to carbon trading.
Yes, and that's something that was already 2 years ago under the Kyoto Protocol. One of the reasons I said is we've got a very, very bureaucratic system, very credible, but very bureaucratic. And now we do project per project auditing, costing a lot of money. But if you can have similar projects under one umbrella, you only have to register one umbrella and one demonstration project. And that is what we've actually set up in South Africa for wind, for solar, for tri-generation. Those are the first ones that we putting in and are in the process of getting registered.
How are we doing in South Africa? How's the government doing? How's the private sector doing? How is the market in carbon doing?
And how is climate change doing? Yeah. Climate change is real and it's happening. The impacts of that people are starting to quantify, but in terms of government, the government is very committed to a low carbon economy and making it happen. And I think a lot of businesses, you always have the leaders and the laggers. We've got really good leaders in South Africa in terms of taking action, moving towards the low carbon economy. And then we've got laggers which would need sort of the government prodding a bit to say that we need to do some things differently. Some sectors it's easier to do. They know what they can do and what they can't. And other industries like mining, we need it in the low carbon economy, but exactly how can they go lower footprint? And how can they do that while creating green jobs? Because that's the new word as well.
What about nuclear? That's the one word you didn't mention. It's not about carbon, but there are views that it is hazardous in other ways or potentially.
Yes. Nuclear was always excluded from the Kyoto Protocol in terms of CDM. So it does come with a lower carbon footprint because it's not using a fossil fuel. So the fossil fuel and the whole carbon market is about oil, coal and gas. So nuclear is clearly not in there.
But to be encouraged as an alternative.
It's definitely not into it because it said, how can you make decisions that for thousands of years the legacy of that decision will still linger on? So if you talk about nuclear waste, should you actually, in what language do you put even the warnings on there to say do not go there? So that's a big concern with nuclear, is not the low carbon side to it, but the other side, not even the science side. It's the communities around it, and it's the communities living with the waste streams for a very long time.
What about the market, the trading? If you want to discourage something, tax it. If you want to reward it, then let people make a return on it.
There is a market, and the EU has been for many years driving the market. The market is now really big. There were more carbon traded than primary gold, the previous years. So it's becoming a real big market, with the biggest buyer being the EU. Now with the EU saying we are changing some tactics, a lot of other, but it's a fragmented market that's opening up now. So that means it will be more complicated to do business, because to get a real price, are you talking to the Californian scheme or the Australian scheme? At what point Will you trade where? What are the rules for this and the rules for that? But that seems to be, that's currently happening. A fragmented market linking between New Zealand and Australia is happening. Linking between Canada and California is happening. So there's a lot of linking happening, but there's not the hope of a global agreement is the same as the hope of global peace. It sounds good, but to get it going is not as easy.
It sounds like progress has been made. How much progress? And perhaps another way of asking the question is, if we hadn't developed this market in carbon trading and these initiatives that you're talking about, how worse off would we be?
Because climate change, there's two ways of dealing with climate change. The one is started to reduce, mitigate emissions. So to have just less emissions going into the atmosphere. And then on the other hand is adaptation, is dealing with the changes as they come on. Now, you can't just focus on mitigation without leaving adaptation. So there is a lot of focus currently being put on adaptation, how to do it, when to do it, and where. But the mitigation, if we did not take those actions, you will make adaptation just that much more difficult. So mitigation, all those projects that we have, they would not have happened if it was not for the carbon market, because there's no legislation. They are all voluntary projects. You don't have to reduce nitrous oxides. You don't have to capture the methane from the landfills. But we are doing because there's a carbon market. And that is the benefit of the carbon market.
How's this market been affected by the European markets? And, you know, in times of crisis, people say, never mind the green stuff, we just need to survive.
Yes, and the carbon market has been hit by a range of things. But number one is if people say, I'm not planning to grow, so I don't need more carbon credits. I've got enough for what I'm doing. And therefore, they would not sort of be trading. The one thing that is that the principle of the whole carbon market is based on climate change being a reality. And as such, the whole world in terms of measurements, we are hitting those barriers that we previously thought we would not be going towards. So the impact of that is currently being studied, is to say, hang on, you know, we should be careful moving into a territory of dangerous levels that we previously not bargained on. So in that way, even the slowdown of the economy is to the benefit because it slows the emissions going into the atmosphere. But the pricing out of carbon, pricing in of carbon, pricing out of fossil fuel is a reality that's here to stay.
Well, that was Harmke Immink, who is director at Promethium Carbon.